The Montgomery Bus Boycott was a civil rights protest during which African Americans refused to ride the buses in Montgomery, Alabama, in protest of the city's bus segregation laws. The bus boycott was regarded as the first large-scale demonstration against segregation in the United States and helped a young pastor by the name of Martin Luther King Jr. emerge as a leader of the civil rights movement. And if this is the type of content that you enjoy, you can find more content like this at whatmikehistory.com. Also, if you'd like to support the channel, you can do so on my Patreon page and my Buy Me Coffee in the description below. Also, give us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts and support the YouTube channel. But without further ado, let's get started.
Are you struggling to conceive? You have options, and at Piedmont Reproductive Endocrinology Group, we'll make sure you have the guidance and support you need. PREG is known for individualized fertility care that's unique to every patient. We take the time to provide a reassuring and empowering experience because we believe that you deserve nothing less. Let us help you on your journey to parenthood. Visit us at pregonline.com to learn more. Get the guidance and support you need at Piedmont Reproductive Endocrinology Group.
During the middle of the 20th century, Jim Crow not only separated the races, but controlled every aspect of African Americans' lives, like keeping African Americans poor. By the 1950s in Montgomery, nearly 3/5 of black women worked as a maid for white families, and 3/4 of employed black men worked unskilled labor. It also kept whites and blacks from learning together, playing together, and riding public transportation. Along with working class blacks, thousands of black students also rode the buses in Montgomery, Alabama. The problem was everything about riding the bus in Montgomery was humiliating for black passengers. See, in other cities like Atlanta or Nashville, where black passengers sat in the back and white passengers sat in the front, and both groups met in the middle as the bus filled, and as seats were taken, both races would stand. However, in Montgomery, they had their own rules. The first row of seats were reserved for white passengers, and the rear was reserved for black passengers. But if the bus became so crowded that white seats were filled, the driver would move the colored section and order any African American to get up and make room further to the back, or stand in the aisle, or leave the bus completely. In fact, if one white passenger wanted to sit in a row occupied by 4 black bus riders, all 4 of them would have to get up to the back of the bus. Additionally, all riders had to enter in the front of the bus to pay their fare, but unless the entire white section were empty, black passengers had to get off and re-enter in the rear. According to the law, no passenger was required to move or give up their seat or stand on the bus if it were crowded or no other seats were available, but bus drivers simply ignored the law and adopted the practice of requiring black riders to move if there were no seats in the white-only section, and it became customary for black passengers to move when the driver told them so. To enforce this, the Montgomery City Bus Line hired tough men to drive their buses, and the city ordinance empowered the drivers to achieve this goal. The drivers understood that along with driving the buses, their job was to enforce Jim Crow, and many bus drivers went above and beyond even the segregation laws. African Americans were routinely assaulted, shortchanged, accosted, and left stranded even after paying their fares. The roots of the Montgomery Bus Boycott began years before even Rosa Parks' arrest in 1955. The roots began with the Women's Political Council, or WPC, which was a group of African American women professionals who were an early force in the civil rights movement in Montgomery. They were organized by Mary Fair Burks. The group initially was created for black women's involvement in civic affairs, promoting voter registration, and to aid victims of rape or assault. But by 1949, Joanne Robinson, an English professor at Alabama State College, joined the council. Robinson succeeded Burks as the WPC's president in 1950, and by then, black women were regularly being humiliated on the Montgomery bus service, and Robinson had firsthand experience with those segregated bus lines, so she shifted the council's primary focus to challenging the seating policy. The same time, Edgar Daniel Nixon, who was a Pullman porter in 1945, Nixon was elected president of the Montgomery branch of the NAACP. Later, in 1947, he became the state president of the NAACP. Years before the Montgomery Bus Boycott, Nixon worked for voting rights and civil rights of African Americans in Montgomery. By 1954, E.D. Nixon and Joanne Robinson had firmly set their sights on the segregationist policies on the city's bus line, and they regularly met with Mayor A.W. Gale and outlined the changes that they sought for Montgomery's bus system. First, hiring black bus drivers. Second, fix the segregated seating. And third, more bus stops in black neighborhoods. While they succeeded in pressuring the city to hire its first black police officers, they made little progress in their effort to desegregate the bus line. So the WPC's members attempted to meet with bus company officials, but the officials simply stated that segregation was a city and state policy. However, the bus officials did agree to have bus stops at every corner in black neighborhoods as a concession. After the WPC meeting with city officials and in the early days after Brown versus the Board of Education's Supreme Court decision in 1954, Joanne Robinson reiterated the council's request in a May 22nd letter to Mayor A.W. Gale, stating that there was a growing support among local black organizations for a bus boycott. Robinson wrote, "There has been talk of 25 or more local organizations in planning a citywide bus boycott." By 1955, Robinson and Nixon had decided that when the right person was arrested, they would initiate a bus boycott. The person had to be someone that would anger the black community into action, that would agree to test the segregation laws in court, and most importantly, had to be above reproach. So when Claudette Colvin, a 15-year-old black student, was arrested in March 1955 for refusing to give up her seat on a Montgomery bus, organizers thought they had found the perfect person and began discussing a bus boycott. Colvin's arrest and conviction angered and unified the black community. But when E.D. Nixon discovered that the 15-year-old was unmarried and pregnant, he decided not to use her as a point person because he was worried that she would not be able to command the support of religious conservative blacks. So, on December 1st, 1955, when Rosa Parks was commuting on a Montgomery Cleveland Avenue bus from her job at a local department store, and she sat in the first row of seats in the color section, and when those seats filled, driver James F. Blake asked Parks and 3 others to vacate their seats. The others complied, and Parks simply refused. She was arrested and charged with the violation of Chapter 6, Section 11 of the segregation laws of the Montgomery City Code. Parks called E.D. Nixon to bail her out of jail, and Nixon then conferred with Joanne Robinson about the Parks case. Robinson believed that it was important to seize the opportunity because Parks and her husband were very active in the NAACP, where she served as a secretary. They were also deeply respected in the community, and because of this, they seemed like the ideal person to mobilize a mass protest around. So Parks, the NAACP, WPC, all agreed that Parks would be the point person for the boycott. Martin Luther King recalled in his memoirs that Miss Parks was ideal for the role assigned to her by history because her character was impeccable, her dedication was deeply rooted, and she was one of the most respected people in the Negro community. Nixon called a number of local ministers to set up a meeting between the local ministers to begin organizing support for the boycott. One of the men he called was Martin Luther King Jr., a young minister who had newly arrived from Atlanta. King said that he would participate in the boycott and that he had already arranged a meeting with his church congregation on the issue. Joanne Robinson would stay up all night printing over 35,000 handbills to announce the boycott. It would state, "Another woman has been arrested and thrown in jail because she refused to give up her seat so a white person could sit down. It is the second time since Claudette's Colvin case that a Negro woman has been arrested for the same thing. This has to be stopped. Negroes have rights too, and if Negroes do not ride the buses, they will not operate it. 3/4 of the riders are Negro, and yet we are arrested, or we have to stand in empty seats. If we do not do something, they will not stop with the arrest, and they will continue. The next time, it may be you or your daughter or your mother. This woman's case will come up on Monday. We are therefore asking for Negroes to stay off the buses on Monday in protest of the arrest and trial. Don't ride the bus to work, to school, or to town, or anywhere on Monday. You can afford to stay out of school for one day if you have nowhere to go other than by bus. You can afford to stay out of town for one day if you work, take a cab, or walk. Please, children, grown-ups, don't ride the buses on Monday. Please stay off all the buses." The next morning, December 2nd, there was a meeting of about 50 people in the basement of the Dexter Avenue Church. First, Parks told her story of her arrest, and the group created a new organization and selected the name the Montgomery Improvement Association to oversee the continuation and maintenance of the boycott. They also elected Martin Luther King as their president because Nixon believed that King had not been compromised by dealing with the white power structure within Montgomery. Rosa Parks recalled that The advantage of having Dr. King as president is that he was new to Montgomery and to civil rights work, and that he had not been there long enough to make any strong friends or enemies. The newly created organization then began discussing boycott strategies. The group proposed a list of demands very similar to demands presented by the WPC, and the MIA decided to mount a one-day boycott December 5th, the same day Parks would be tried in court. As the news of the boycott spread, the protest received unexpected publicity in weekend newspapers, on the radio, and television reports. In addition to the WPC circulating flyers, black ministers announced a boycott in church, and the Montgomery Advisor published a front-page article about the boycott. On December 5th, Parks was tried on charges of disorderly conduct and violating a local ordinance. After being found guilty, she was fined $10 plus $4 in court costs. The very first day, the boycott proved to be extremely effective. About 40,000 black bus riders decided to not ride the bus that day. Initially, the bus boycott was only scheduled to be one day, but the first day of the boycott was so effective that the MIA began to discuss the idea of extending the bus boycott indefinitely. They believed that the bus boycott could be effective because the Montgomery bus system was so dependent on African American riders who made 70% of their ridership. But initially, ministers from the MIA wanted to keep the boycott low-key as to not upset the white folks, and this was complete opposite of what E.D. Nixon and other activists had hoped to achieve. The ministers never expected the boycott to be so successful, and now with the overwhelming support of the black community, they realized that they had no choice but to continue. So by the end of this meeting, the MIA was fully committed to a very public bus boycott. December 7, 1955, the FBI's mobile office began to forward information on the bus boycott to FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. Hoover noted that there was agitation among Negroes in Montgomery, Alabama, and attempted to find any derogatory information he could about Martin Luther King. After unsuccessful talks with city commissioners and bus company officials on December 8th, the MIA issued a formal list of demands, and initially the demands did not include changing the segregation laws. Rather, the group demanded courteous treatment from bus operators, first come, first served seating on the bus for all, with blacks sitting in the rear and whites sitting in the front, and black operators in primarily black routes. This demand was a compromise for leaders of the boycotts who believed that the city of Montgomery would be more likely to accept this than the demand for full integration of the buses. Ultimately, the demands were not met, and a group of 5 Montgomery women, represented by Attorney Fred D. Gray and NAACP and the Montgomery Improvement Association, sued the city and the U.S. District Court, seeking to have bus segregation laws totally invalidated. During this time, Montgomery black residents continued to stay off the buses, and the boycott proved to be extremely effective. With the loss of black riders, the city's transit system fell into serious economic distress. This was despite city officials and white citizens attempting to defeat the boycott. For example, black taxicab drivers charged 10 cents per ride, a fare equal to the cost of riding the bus. So city officials began to penalize black taxicab drivers for aiding the bus boycott. Then the MIA developed an intricate carpool system of about 300 cars to get people to and from work. When the city pressured local insurance companies not to insure cars using carpools, the boycott leaders arranged policies through Lloyd's of London. In addition to using private motor vehicles, some people use non-motorized means to get around, such as they cycled, they rode mules, horse-drawn carriages. Some people even hitchhiked, but most people simply walked. During rush hour, sidewalks were often extremely crowded. As the bus received few, if any, passengers, the bus company officials asked the city commission to stop servicing black communities altogether. Meanwhile, the ranks of the White Citizens Council would surge. The White Citizens Council was created by white segregationists in response to the Brown versus the Board of Education decision. While it typically drew a more middle to upper middle class membership than, say, the Ku Klux Klan, the WCC still resorted to violence. Both King and Ralph Abernathy's houses were firebombed, as were 4 black Baptist churches. After King's house was attacked, the news of the bombing spread very quickly, and 300 angry African Americans soon gathered outside his house, where King gave a speech stating, If you have weapons, take them home. If you do not have them, please do not go seek them. We cannot solve this problem with retaliatory violence. We must meet violence with nonviolence. Remember, in the words of Jesus, he who lives by the sword will perish by the sword. We must love our white brothers no matter what they do to us. We must make them know that we love them. And Jesus cries out in the words that echo across centuries to love your neighbor, bless them that curse you, and pray for them that despitefully use you. This is words we must live by. We must meet hate with love. And remember that if I am stopped, the movement will not stop, because God is with the movement, and you take this glowing faith and this radiant assurance. In February 1956, city officials obtained an injunction against the boycott and indicted over 80 boycott leaders under a 1921 law prohibiting conspiracies that interfere with lawful business. Rather than wait for their arrest, they turned themselves in as an act of defiance. King was ordered to pay a $500 fine or serve 368 days in jail. However, he would spend just 2 weeks in jail, and the move backfired by bringing national attention to the protest. King commented on his arrest by saying, "I was proud of my crime. It was the crime of joining my people in nonviolent protests against injustice." June 5th, 1956, a Montgomery Federal District Court ruled in Brown v. Gale that bus segregation was unconstitutional, stating that any law requiring racially segregated seating on a bus violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. That amendment guaranteed that all citizens have equal rights and equal protections under state and federal laws. The city appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court upheld the lower court's ruling, and on December 20th, 1956, King called for an end of the boycott, and the community agreed. The next morning, he boarded an integrated bus with Ralph Abernathy and E.D. Nixon. King said that the bus boycott, "We came to see that in the long run, it is more honorable to walk in dignity than ride in humiliation. So we decided to substitute tired feet for tired souls and walk the streets of Montgomery." The boycott lasted for 381 days. In the aftermath, the backlash against the court was quick and brutal. December 2nd, someone fired a shotgun through the front door of Martin Luther King's home. A day later, white men attacked a black teenager as she exited a Montgomery City bus. 4 days later, 2 buses were fired upon by snipers, with a pregnant woman being shot in both legs. By January 10th, 1957, bombs destroyed 5 black churches and the home of Reverend Robert Gans, who was a white Montgomeryan who sided publicly with the Montgomery Improvement Association. In response, the city would suspend bus service for several weeks due to the violence. January 3rd, 1957, a group of Klan members lynched a black man, Willie Edwards, because he was allegedly dating a white woman, and the city attempted to strengthen the segregation laws in other areas. By March of 1957, the city had passed ordinances making it unlawful for white persons and colored persons to play together or accompany each other in any game of dice, cards, dominoes, checkers, billiards, softball, basketball, baseball, golf, track, beaches, or lakes, or any other outdoor activity. Later that year, the Montgomery police charged 7 Klansmen with the bombings of the churches. Of course, all of the defendants were eventually acquitted, and Rosa Parks left Montgomery due to death threats and employment blacklisting in that same year. According to journalist Charles Silberman, by 1963, most Negroes in Montgomery have returned to the old practice of riding in the back of the bus. Shortly after the end of the bus boycott, Martin Luther King helped found the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, or the SCLC, a major civil rights organization that worked to end segregation throughout the South. The SCLC was instrumental in the civil rights campaign in Birmingham, Alabama, and the March on Washington. The Montgomery bus boycott had a resounding effect far and beyond simple desegregation of public buses. It introduced Martin Luther King to the world with his role in the boycott, and the boycott garnered international attention to the struggles of African Americans in the United States. Additionally, the Montgomery Improvement Association's tactics of combining mass nonviolent protests with Christian ethics were the cornerstone of the civil rights movement in the United States. Thank you. This has been the story of the Montgomery bus boycott. If you like this, if you like more stories like this, you can find more stories like this at OneMicHistory.com. Also, you can do so on my Patreon, my Buy Me Coffee in the description below. Give us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts and support the YouTube channel. Peace.